There's a phenomenon Jung documented extensively that most people experience but few understand. When you achieve genuine inner calm, not performed peace, not suppressed emotion, but authentic differentiated centeredness, it often triggers intense rage in people still operating from unconscious chaos. And this isn't because you're doing anything to provoke them. It's not because you're being cold or withholding or passive-aggressive. It's because your presence, simply existing in calm while they exist in chaos, creates an unbearable psychological confrontation. This happens in relationships, in families, in workplaces, anywhere differentiated consciousness encounters participation mystique. You're centered. They're destabilizing. You remain grounded. They escalate. And your calm, your simple refusal to join them in chaos, is experienced not as neutrality but as the ultimate provocation. Jung spent decades studying why this happens. Not the surface explanation that they're jealous or triggered, but the deeper psychological mechanism operating beneath the rage. Your calm is a mirror, and what it reflects back to them is unbearable. Jung observed that people who've developed genuine psychological calm aren't trying to be peaceful. They're not performing serenity to prove something. They've simply completed enough shadow integration and differentiation that chronic reactivity is no longer their baseline. They've done the work of making the unconscious conscious. They've integrated the shadow material that once drove compulsive emotional responses. They've withdrawn their participation from dynamics that require constant dysregulation to maintain. And when you exist from this place, centered, grounded, psychologically sovereign, you stop being available for certain kinds of interaction. You don't absorb others' chaos. You don't take on their projections. You don't escalate when provoked. You don't defend when accused. You don't explain when misunderstood. Not because you're withholding these responses strategically, but because your entire psychological system has reorganized around a different center. You exist in your own reality, and that reality is calm. This calm isn't the calm of suppression. Jung distinguished clearly between repression, pushing material into the unconscious to avoid dealing with it, and integration, making unconscious material conscious and incorporating it into the whole self. People who suppress emotion appear calm on the surface but are actually sitting on enormous pressure. And that pressure eventually explodes. The calm Jung documented in differentiated individuals is different. It's the calm that emerges after you've integrated what you were avoiding. After you've looked at your shadow and recognized it as yours. After you've withdrawn your projections and reclaimed your energy. This integrated calm is stable. It doesn't require constant maintenance. It doesn't depend on external conditions remaining peaceful. You can be calm in the middle of someone else's storm because your calm isn't a reaction to their chaos. It's your baseline state. And this is what makes it so confronting to people still operating from unconscious reactivity. Because they need you to be destabilized. They need you to join them in chaos. They need you to react. And when you don't, when you simply remain centered, it reveals something they've been avoiding their entire lives. Let's be specific about what happens psychologically when your calm encounters their chaos. Jung documented this as a particular type of projection crisis. In participation mystique, the unconscious fusion that characterizes most undifferentiated relationships, everyone is constantly regulating everyone else's emotional states. When you're upset, I become upset. When I'm chaotic, you absorb that chaos. We exist in constant emotional contagion, each person's state affecting the others, boundaries dissolved, no clear sense of where one person's emotion ends and another's begins. This fusion feels like connection. It feels like empathy, like caring, like being there for each other. But Jung observed it's actually the absence of differentiation. When you calm down because they calm down, when you escalate because they escalate, when your emotional state is determined by their emotional state, you're not connected, you're fused. And fusion, though it can feel intimate, is actually the obstacle to genuine relationship. Because neither person is fully present. Both are lost in participation mystique. When you differentiate, when you do the psychological work of developing genuine self separate from fusion, your emotional state stops being determined by others' emotional states. You can be in the presence of someone who's destabilizing and remain centered, not because you don't care, not because you're detached or cold, but because you've developed what Jung called psychological sovereignty. Your center is yours. It's not dependent on maintaining fusion with others. It's not contingent on everyone around you being calm. It exists independently. And the first time someone who's been in participation mystique with you encounters your differentiated calm, they experience it as abandonment, as betrayal, as you becoming cold, distant, changed. Because in the old fusion-based dynamic, your role was to absorb their chaos and reflect back regulation. When they were upset, you became upset, which paradoxically helped them regulate because your distress proved they weren't alone in theirs. When they escalated, you escalated, which validated their emotional state. You were the mirror that confirmed their reality. But now you're calm. Now you remain centered. Now when they destabilize, you don't join them. And this non-participation feels to them like you've stopped caring, like you've become indifferent, like you're punishing them with your peace. Jung documented that this interpretation, that calm equals coldness, is projection. They're experiencing your differentiation as abandonment because they've never known connection outside of fusion. To them, caring meant absorbing. Empathy meant taking on their chaos. Love meant sacrificing your center to maintain theirs. Your calm confronts this entire framework. Without saying a word, without explaining anything, your simple existence in centered presence reveals that connection doesn't require fusion, that you can care about someone without absorbing their emotional chaos. That empathy doesn't mean losing yourself, that love doesn't demand constant sacrifice of sovereignty. And this revelation, this unavoidable confrontation your calm creates, is what triggers the rage. Because rage, Jung observed, is what emerges when projection fails. When they project their chaos onto you and you don't absorb it. When they project their need for regulation onto you and you don't comply. When they project their interpretation that calm equals coldness and you simply exist in centered warmth. The projection returns to sender. And suddenly they're in proximity to their own material. The chaos they were externalizing onto you. The dependence they were projecting. The equation of calm with coldness that was actually their own fear. This return of projection is unbearable. Because as long as you were absorbing, they could avoid their own psychological work. As long as you were getting upset when they were upset, escalating when they escalated, they could maintain the illusion that the problem was external, that the chaos was something happening between you rather than something unintegrated within them. But your calm destroys that illusion. Your centeredness while they're destabilizing makes it impossible to avoid the truth. The chaos is theirs. The dependence on external regulation is theirs. The inability to self-soothe, to remain grounded, to exist in peace, all theirs. And rather than face this, rather than do the difficult work of integration that would allow them to develop their own calm, they rage. They escalate further. They accuse you of being cold, of not caring, of having changed. They create crisis after crisis, hoping that eventually the intensity will be enough to pull you back into participation mystique. That if they just make it dramatic enough, painful enough, chaotic enough, you'll break. You'll react. You'll join them in the destabilization that feels like connection, because it's the only kind of relating they've ever known. Jung documented that this escalation in response to calm is entirely predictable. It's not personal, though it feels personal. It's not about you, though it's directed at you. It's the unconscious system trying every possible mechanism to recreate the fusion that your differentiation ended. And the more centered you remain, the more intense the attempts become. Because your calm isn't just neutral, it's a constant, ongoing confrontation with everything they're avoiding. Let me be clear about what this looks like in actual interaction. You're in conversation with someone who's upset. In the old dynamic, you would have absorbed their distress, become distressed yourself, and together, you would have spiraled into shared chaos that paradoxically felt like intimacy. But now you're differentiated, so you listen, you're present, you're genuinely caring. But you don't absorb. You don't take on their emotional state as if it's yours, you remain calm. And they feel this immediately. They feel the absence of fusion, and they interpret it as absence of care. You don't even care, they might say. You're just sitting there calm while I'm falling apart. And there's truth in their observation. You are calm while they're falling apart. But the interpretation is projection. Your calm doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care without fusion. You care while maintaining your center. You care in a way that doesn't require you to abandon yourself. But to someone operating from participation mystique, this is incomprehensible. Caring without fusion doesn't compute, so they escalate. They make it more dramatic. They accuse you more intensely. They create bigger crisis, hoping that the magnitude of their distress will finally be enough to break through your boundaries and pull you back into the absorption that felt like love. And when you remain calm through this escalation, when you stay grounded while they're ramping up intensity, the rage emerges. Because now you're not just failing to participate in fusion. You're demonstrating through your continued calm that participation in their chaos is optional, that it's possible to care about someone without being destabilized by them. That connection doesn't require constant emotional contagion. And this demonstration, this living proof that fusion isn't necessary, threatens their entire psychological framework. Jung observed that for people who've organized their identity around being able to destabilize others, who've built their sense of mattering on their capacity to create emotional chaos that others absorb, your calm is existential threat. Because if you can remain centered while they're escalating, if you can stay grounded while they're creating crisis, if you can exist in peace while they're in chaos, what does that say about them? What does it mean that their distress, their crisis, their emotional intensity doesn't move you? They interpret it as evidence they don't matter, as proof you don't care, as confirmation of their deepest fear that they're not significant enough to impact you. But Jung would reframe this entirely. Your calm doesn't mean they don't matter. It means you matter too. Your centeredness isn't evidence of their insignificance, it's evidence of your sovereignty. Your peace doesn't prove you don't care. It proves you've learned to care without self-abandonment. But this reframe requires differentiation they haven't developed. It requires recognizing that relationship can exist without fusion. That significance doesn't mean having the power to destabilize someone. That mattering doesn't require making others as chaotic as you are. And because they haven't done this psychological work, your calm can only register as rejection, as coldness, as punishment. And so they rage, they accuse, they escalate, they do everything possible to break your calm and pull you back into the chaos that felt like connection. And Jung documented that this is the moment of truth for the differentiated person, because you will be tempted to explain, to defend your calm, to justify your centeredness, to prove that you do care, you're not cold, you haven't changed in the way they're accusing. But explanation to someone operating from participation mystique is participation in participation mystique. The moment you start defending your calm, you've lost it. The moment you begin explaining why you're not cold, you're reacting to projection instead of recognizing it. The moment you try to prove you care in the way they're demanding, by getting upset, by absorbing their chaos, by sacrificing your center, you've validated their framework. You've confirmed that caring requires fusion. That connection demands loss of self. that your calm was indeed something you needed to explain rather than simply your natural state. Jung observed that the differentiated response to rage at your calm is simply to remain calm, not defensively, not aggressively, not smugly, just genuinely centered. You don't explain that you're not cold. You don't defend your peace. You don't sacrifice your groundedness to prove you care. You simply exist in your reality, calm, present, genuinely caring, but unavailable for fusion. And this unavailability, this unwillingness to abandon your center to maintain theirs, is what they ultimately cannot bear, because it means they have to choose. They can either do their own psychological work to develop the calm they're raging against, or they can leave. What they can no longer do is pull you back into participation mystique. Your differentiation is irreversible. Your calm is non-negotiable. And that finality is what the rage is really about. Let's explore what your calm actually reveals that creates such intense reactivity. Jung documented that projection always reveals the projector's disowned shadow material. When someone rages at your calm, they're revealing what they've made shadow. And what they've made shadow in this case is their own capacity for centeredness, their own potential for peace, their own ability to self-regulate without requiring external chaos. Because here's what Jung understood that most people miss. Everyone has the capacity for calm. Everyone can develop centered presence. Everyone has access to the psychological mechanisms that create sovereignty. But developing these capacities requires shadow work. It requires looking at the ways you've been dependent on others for regulation, the ways you've used emotional intensity to maintain fusion, the ways you've organized your identity around being reactive rather than responsive, the ways you've avoided genuine self-development by staying fused with others. This is difficult work, painful work, work that most people avoid their entire lives. And one of the primary ways they avoid it is by projecting their potential for calm onto others, and then raging at those others for having what they refuse to develop in themselves. Your calm becomes the externalized representation of their disowned capacity, and raging at you allows them to avoid the confrontation with their own refusal to do the work. Jung called this the speck and plank dynamic. They see the speck of perceived coldness in your calm, while remaining blind to the plank of their own undeveloped capacity for centeredness. They focus on what your calm supposedly lacks: warmth, reactivity, participation in their chaos, while avoiding what their own chaos reveals: dependence, undifferentiation, refusal to self-regulate. Your calm is the speck they obsess over. Their chaos is the plank they cannot see. And the rage serves a function. It maintains the projection. As long as they're focused on your calm as the problem, as evidence you're cold, you've changed, you don't care, they don't have to face their own chaos as the actual issue. As long as they can make your centeredness the target, they avoid the confrontation with their own reactivity. The rage, though it appears to be about you, is actually protecting them from themselves. Jung observed that this is why explanation fails. When you try to explain that you're not cold, that you do care, that your calm doesn't mean what they think it means, you're accepting the frame that your calm is the problem requiring explanation. But your calm isn't the problem. Their rage at your calm is revealing their problem, the projection of their own disowned capacity for peace onto you, and their refusal to reclaim it through genuine psychological work. The differentiated response isn't explanation, it's recognition. You recognize that their rage isn't about you. It's about what your calm makes visible in them. And you recognize that you cannot do their shadow work for them. You cannot develop their capacity for centeredness by explaining yours. You cannot make them see that calm and care aren't opposites by defending yourself against accusations of coldness. All you can do is remain in your reality, calm, centered, clear, and allow them to either do their own work or not. This is perhaps the hardest part of differentiation. because it means accepting that some people will interpret your calm as coldness no matter what you say. Some people will experience your peace as punishment no matter how you explain. Some people will rage at your centeredness no matter how you demonstrate that it comes from care, not from distance. And you cannot make them see differently. You cannot force consciousness in someone committed to projection. Jung documented that this acceptance that you cannot control others' interpretation of your reality is crucial to maintaining differentiated calm. Because if you make your peace contingent on others understanding it, you've already lost your center. If your calm requires external validation, it's not genuine sovereignty. If you need them to see that you're not cold before you can remain centered, your centeredness is still dependent on fusion. Genuine calm, Jung observed, exists independently of others' interpretations. You're centered whether they recognize it or not. You're grounded whether they validate it or not. You're peaceful whether they experience it as care or as coldness. Because your reality is yours. It's not contingent on their perception. It's not dependent on their approval. It's not negotiable based on their accusations. And this non-contingent calm, this sovereignty that doesn't require external confirmation, is what ultimately either breaks through their projection or ends the relationship. Because at some point, they have to choose. They can continue raging at your calm while you remain centered. But that becomes exhausting. The projection isn't landing. The accusations aren't destabilizing you. The escalation isn't pulling you back into fusion. And eventually they either recognize that their rage is revealing their own work, or they find someone else who's still available for participation. Mystique. Jung observed that some people, when they've exhausted all attempts to destabilize differentiated calm, do begin their own shadow work. They start to wonder, if this person can remain calm while I'm in chaos, what does that say about my chaos? If they can be centered while I'm reactive, what would it take for me to develop that centeredness? If their peace isn't coldness, if it's actually integration, what would my peace look like? These questions mark the beginning of individuation, the beginning of reclaiming projected capacity, the beginning of recognizing that rage at others' calm is avoidance of developing your own. And when this recognition occurs, the rage transforms. It becomes grief. Grief for the years spent in participation. Mystique. Grief for the energy wasted trying to destabilize others instead of developing self. Grief for the realization that calm was always available. You just refused the work required to develop it. But this transformation is rare. More commonly, Jung documented, people who cannot destabilize differentiated calm simply leave. They find new targets for projection. New people still operating from fusion who are available to absorb chaos. New relationships where participation. Mystique is still possible. And they repeat the entire pattern with someone else. And the differentiated person, the one whose calm triggered all the rage, is left with a choice. You can grieve what was never actually possible. You can accept that some people will only ever interpret sovereignty as coldness. You can integrate the recognition that your calm, though it comes from genuine care and shadow work, will be experienced as rejection by those committed to fusion. Or you can question your calm, doubt your differentiation, wonder if maybe you are cold, maybe you have changed, maybe your peace is actually punishment. Jung observed that this moment, when rage at your calm has exhausted itself and you're left alone with your centeredness, is when differentiation is tested. Because differentiation that requires external validation isn't complete. Sovereignty that needs others to confirm it isn't genuine. Calm that doubts itself when others rage at it hasn't been fully integrated. The test is whether you can remain centered in your own knowing, whether you can exist in your reality regardless of others' interpretations, whether your peace can survive being called coldness, whether your calm can withstand being experienced as punishment, whether your groundedness can remain stable when others insist it's distance. This isn't about becoming hard. It's not about not caring what others think. It's about knowing what's true beyond others' projections. You know your calm comes from integration, not suppression. You know your peace comes from shadow work, not avoidance. You know your centeredness comes from genuine self-development, not from coldness. And that knowing, that internal certainty that doesn't require external confirmation, is what Jung called psychological maturity. When you can remain calm while being accused of coldness, centered while being accused of distance, peaceful while being accused of punishment, and you can do this without defending, without explaining, without doubting, you've completed a crucial stage of differentiation. You exist in your reality. Others exist in theirs. And the gap between these realities is no longer your problem to close through self-abandonment. Your calm enrages them because it reveals their chaos. Your peace confronts their reactivity. Your centeredness exposes their dependence on external regulation. And none of this is your fault, your responsibility, or your problem to fix. You did your shadow work. You developed your sovereignty. You integrated what they're still projecting. And their rage at your calm is simply their confrontation with their own refusal to do the same work. You cannot make them calm. You cannot force them to integrate. You cannot do their individuation for them. All you can do is remain in your reality, centered, grounded, genuinely peaceful, and trust that your calm, though it enrages those still operating from chaos, is exactly what genuine psychological health looks like. Jung spent his life documenting that the goal of individuation isn't to be understood by everyone. It's not to have your reality validated by those still lost in projection. It's to become whole, to integrate shadow, to differentiate from collective unconsciousness, to develop genuine self. And sometimes, often, that genuine self will be misinterpreted, misunderstood, projected upon by those who haven't done the same work. Your calm isn't coldness, it's consciousness. Your peace isn't punishment, it's integration. Your centeredness isn't distance, it's differentiation. And the rage others feel toward these qualities says everything about their disowned shadow and nothing about your reality. Remain calm. Not to prove anything. Not to win anything. Not to make anyone rage. But simply because calm is your genuine state after you've done the work of becoming whole. And that wholeness, that integration, that genuine psychological sovereignty, that's what Jung called living your actual life instead of the life participation Mystique demanded. This is why your calm enrages them. And this is why your calm is not your problem to explain, defend, or sacrifice. It's simply who you've become. And who you've become is someone who's done the work they're still avoiding. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to breathe, and remember that awareness grows when it's shared. Subscribe, so you don't lose your way when the next reflection arrives. Leave a like. It helps this message reach others who need to hear it but don't yet know why. And share your thoughts below, because every comment here becomes a spark, one awakened mind helping another remember. Together we move beyond the dark.